Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we are going to talk about 10 things to think about if you are taking the July 2022 exam. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about what you should be thinking about if you're studying for the July 2022 bar exam. And some of this information might be a little bit of a review for those of you who are very diligent listeners of the podcast, but it is always a good idea to get organized and make sure your bar prep is on track. So let's get started. Well, first and foremost, and this sounds like it should be obvious, but we have seen issues.
Yeah.
I think the first thing people need to do is decide where they're going to take the test and actually sign up for the exam. And as part of that, you need to make sure your application to the bar is actually completed. And this means any character and fitness requirements and anything else that they ask you for, you need to make sure that you do.
Yes, and do not do it while you're trying to study. You need to do it now. Please.
Right. And I think this is particularly important for anyone who's coming from anything other than, just getting ready to graduate type of situation. If you are a foreign trained attorney, if you're an attorney applicant, all of these things, you just really need to make sure your ducks are in a row here because some of these applications are kind of weird and they ask for some strange stuff and it's a lot of putting together information, every single place you've ever lived, like all this kind of crazy stuff that you think, you'll just do this in 20 minutes, but that's just kind of almost, I feel like it's almost like doing your taxes.
Oh, I think it's worse than your taxes.
Oh, I don't know about that. But
well, okay. Like maybe back in the day
of my taxes right now. I'm like very miserable about it.
I know. Maybe back in the day when my taxes were just like one W-2.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. In that it was worse. But now that you're like, grown up and have a lot of complicated things and run a business, et cetera,
right.
Probably a close call.
Exactly.
But it can be. And I think particularly, some people may have issues that they're going to have to deal with. I had friends who had things they had to disclose on their law school applications that they also had to disclose on their bar applications. And all of this stuff can get a little tricky.
Yep, exactly. And you don't want to make mistakes that could have your application flagged. No, they don't like finding out that you didn't disclose something or that you didn't disclose the truth. So just slow down and make sure it's all right.
Yeah, exactly. You're dealing with lawyers here. Make sure that you've dotted your I's, you've crossed the T's. And if you have any questions, you need to find someone who actually knows this information to help you, whether that's putting in a call to the actual bar and asking the question, or even if it comes down to it, finding an attorney who helps people deal with stuff like this to make sure that you're not going to have problems.
Yeah, I think I really don't know of anyone, and I'm trying to think through all the people I know that have had some issues with their character and fitness. Everyone got licensed. You just sometimes have to jump through some hoops.
Right.
But you don't want to delay your admission or create unnecessary drama. Like you just really want to be forthright about it. If you have, let's say you have an arrest on your application, or I knew of someone who had gotten into some trouble in undergrad, but it technically wasn't an arrest because it was all like campus security and they weren't sure what to disclose and what not to disclose. And so then it's like, I'm like, you got to talk to a lawyer, right? Make sure you know what
who knows what the answer
exactly
to this question is.
Worth it. That one phone call will solve all of these problems, and make sure that you're doing it the correct way. So doing it early is just going to either help you glide straight through and know that box is checked, or if there are some bumps coming down the road, they're not going to stop you from getting licensed or create drama during bar prep, which is not great either.
Yeah, like someone I knew had to disclose an underage DUI situation. And again, like it was not a huge big deal, but they did, as I recall, end up having to go to like alcohol counseling or something just to check that box. And so they needed time to do that.
Yep. So it's just part of being a grown up. You have to do all the paperwork.
Yeah, and do it in a timely manner.
Yeah. All right. So that was number 1. I do like a good top 10 list. So now we'll move on to number 2. This is a big one because we talk about this all the time, that if you need accommodations, apply now. And I literally mean stop this podcast and call the bar. I'm not even kidding. This is such a big deal when I talk to people on the phone who need accommodations. If you think that you need accommodations and you haven't applied, you need to do that as soon as humanly possible. And if you can't get them in one state and you're especially taking the UBE, you could look at another state, but you also need to call that state and see if their accommodations deadline has passed and whether or not you could get accommodations in that state. But all of this takes time and is incredibly important. You got to work on it right now.
And this is another one where, you may end up having to hire someone to like prepare whatever documents you need to apply for this, and they need to be in a certain format, and, you need to find that person, and it's a hassle, but you got to deal with it if you're going to get them. And, it's always a really unfortunate situation where someone misses the deadline for accommodations, or they apply and they're just still not sure, like a week before the exam, what their exam is going to look like. All of this stuff takes forever. Yeah. And, the sooner you do it, the better.
Yeah. So like literally just pause the podcast. Do it right now.
Right.
Unless you're maybe driving, you can get to where you need to go. But really, it's worth it.
Yeah. But as soon as you stop, make that phone call, or at least like look up the number and give yourself a to-do in the next few days to do it.
Yeah.
Because this stuff, it's amazing how long it always takes.
Yeah. All right. Number 3, another thing people often forget about is having to take the MPRE.
Oh, I was guilty of this one almost.
So if you haven't taken it yet, make sure you know when you're going to take it. It's not offered that many times a year, and you cannot get your license if you don't take it.
Yeah, I think for me, I waited until kind of the last possible date I could take it in school, which I just hadn't really thought about it. I hadn't taken professional responsibility yet. I thought, well, I'll take professional responsibility and then I'll take the MPRE, like no problem. And then I realized, I started hearing about people at my school who had failed, and I was like, oh my gosh, what if I fail this test? And then I have to take it like after I take the bar. God, I really should have done this sooner.
Yeah.
So I think ideally you want to give yourself at least 2 shots to take it while you're still in school. And maybe, word to the wise, perhaps plan when you're taking professional responsibility as a class around when you might need to take the MPRE.
Yep. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that if you don't do it before the bar, the next offering is usually in August.
Right.
Which is right after the bar.
Yeah. And I was supposed to be on my bar trip then. And
right.
I was just like, oh my gosh, like what if I have to like do this later? This is not going to be great.
Yeah. So it's just get it over with. Just, you want to get it done, check the box, get the score that you need to. Remember that it's good for a number of years, so just get it done.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just something, you need to take seriously enough to pass it, because people do fail it, even at top schools. Nobody's going to go in cold. And we joke that both of us failed our driving test at some point. It's, kind of along those lines, like a little harder, but like you just got to sit down and learn it.
Yeah, I know. There are just some rules that you have to learn.
Yeah, it's like, how fast am I supposed to go at a railroad crossing? I still don't remember. Is it 25? Is it 35? Is it 45? There's an answer. There is an answer.
And it's in the book, the pamphlet.
It's in the book, and they expect you to know that actually it is, 25 or whatever.
Whatever. Okay, so got to do the MPRE. Next up, number 4 is, and this also should be simple and not need to be stated, but it really does, is make sure that you're going to graduate. Because
no joke, some people do end up not graduating for various reasons.
For various reasons, they don't get their writing requirement done, or they messed up something, or they miscounted a unit, or they didn't get the credits correctly allocated for their externship. All sorts of stuff happens. So if you've had kind of a complicated law school time where maybe you withdrew from some classes or had something come up, I just, go to the registrar, double check, make sure that you're ready to graduate, because could still be a little time to remedy things during the semester, but you also can't get licensed if you don't graduate.
Right. And probably you can't sit for the bar. I don't know, but I would imagine you cannot.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the bar would do
look
with that.
Into if
I
you're
know.
not going to graduate. Yeah, I mean, if schools have pro bono requirements, you need to make sure you're meeting. You mentioned the writing requirement. That one always trips up a few people. And it's not that easy to produce like a 30 to 40 page paper at the last minute.
Well, no, and you have to get a professor to agree to read it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just even producing it. You often have to make sure that you have your professor signed off, and you have to do kind of these intermittent steps. So just make sure that you've checked all of those boxes. And I think COVID, it's going to put people in a lot of weird situations, because I'm sure that people, with online Zoom class, there's confusion about dropping classes or adding classes, or emergencies coming up, and people, having to pull out of classes for health reasons or other family emergencies. I mean, I bet the slew of stuff that registrars dealt with was unheard of during the pandemic.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, but that's why you probably should double check your...
Yeah, just check that box. Go and make sure. I mean, I, for example, almost did not graduate from architecture school because I was about to fail the ballet class that I'd signed up for fun because I was busy and hadn't been able to go, and they were literally going to fail me if I missed one more class, and I needed the credit. And also I had 3 people that were my advisors on my thesis project, and one of them hated the project. And so I ended up having to basically be like, if you do not sign this, I am not graduating, and that was kind of a conversation. So you just never know. You want to make sure everything's done to the extent possible in advance. And if not in advance, you need to have a plan.
Yep. All right. Number 5, sign up for or plan for your bar prep. So, I mean, this seems so easy to do because everybody's like, but the bar review companies have been in my hallway at my school for years and years. Just pick one. But, we have a lot of content about this, about the importance of actually evaluating your options, whether they be the more typical commercial courses or more personalized options. But we really need to take a beat and decide what will work best for you with your budget, with where you're going to study, how you're going to study, with your own, unique strengths and challenges. You really just need to sit down and actually think and evaluate, and not just sign on the dotted line of the loudest company.
Right. Because I think, all the companies provide similar information, and then it's really a question of, okay, is this being provided in a format that's going to be useful to me? Does it look like their schedules are going to be realistic for me, given what I have going on in my life? Different things work better for different people. And I think, there's a lot of pressure, obviously, just to do this thing that everybody else does. But if you know that you're not learning in the way that everyone else does, or that your schedule is not like everyone else's, then maybe you need to think about something a little more non-traditional.
Yeah, I think that's true. The other thing that I've heard from folks talking to us on the phone recently is that, oftentimes a firm may give you a bar stipend and say, oh, well, we'll pay for Barbary. But if you go back to the firm and say, but what if I want to do something different? Could I just get that allocation and apply it to a different program? And sometimes the firms might say yes. Right. So, don't feel like you're not empowered to go ask for what you want. All the firms want you to do is pass so they can bill you out at a higher rate.
Right. And, frankly, most of them, a lot of them, at least that I've heard of or experienced, they just have a stipend that they give you. It's like, oh, you get $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 or whatever they're giving you that week,
Right.
And as I recall, I just basically had to show them at some point that I'd spent that money on something.
Yeah. I think it's worth asking questions if it sounds like it's not flexible and the stipend's not flexible and you want something different. Just they're not going to take it away from you because you asked the recruiter if you could use the money in a different way.
Right, exactly. They may say no, but...
Right, but you can definitely ask. You can definitely ask. Something else that people are talking to us about at this point in the semester, which is number 6 on my list, is thinking about studying early. So this is especially, I think, for 3Ls who are maybe starting to get a little nervous, feeling some butterflies in their belly about sitting for the exam. And I think this is especially true if you didn't take some of the big bar courses while you were in law school. like the big 7 that are tested on the MBEs and the essays, things like Civ Pro, Con Law, Crim Pro, Crim Law, Real Property, Torts, Evidence. Like if you didn't take evidence, maybe you don't want to learn all of evidence during bar prep. Maybe you want to learn some of that early.
Exactly. I think evidence is definitely one that people may not have taken for whatever reason, particularly if they're not planning on doing litigation and maybe don't necessarily realize it's on the MBE, but it is. Yeah. And it is not a topic that is particularly easy to learn, I think, in just a week or so, which is kind of, maybe what you get in a commercial, maybe probably less than that, half a week.
Probably less, I think, like half a week,
yeah. Like 3 days. I don't think you're learning evidence to the extent you need to know it in 3 days. Let's put it that way.
No. I should also note that I left contracts out of our list.
I noticed that, but I hated contracts. So I was just like, oh, well.
You're just like, I was roll by it. Everybody has to take that one. I don't think that's one of them. Yeah. It's like Crim Pro and Evidence, which are usually the ones that we hear that people have skipped out on.
Surprisingly, not every school requires con law.
Really? I thought it was required by the ABA, no?
No, I think even I don't know. I think even Harvard doesn't necessarily require it. I could be wrong on that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's definitely, your school may have a weird something going on. So you may not have taken, or you may have taken a con law class that doesn't cover the type of con law that's actually on the bar.
That's true.
Which is a little bit more, I think, individual rights focused. So, I think this is a place to think about, A, did I take this class at all? Right. And B, if I took it, did it cover the type of material that's actually on the bar? And then C, did I do okay in this class? And do I remember anything from it?
Right.
So if you bombed property and you never wanted to think about any of that again, well, guess what? You need to.
Yep. So if you're worried, you can definitely start reviewing the law early. You can get outlines from companies such as Smart Bar Prep at any time and start studying off of those. Those are some of our favorite substantive outlines. I think a lot of people also don't realize that you can sign up for MBE programs such as Adaptive Bar usually as early as March 1 after the February exam and get access to them the whole season. So from March through July. And that's a great way to start practicing the law that you're studying and apply it. So if you're trying to teach yourself evidence, I believe the best way to learn evidence is by doing fact pattern applications of the law. The law doesn't really mean that much if you don't understand how it's applied to facts.
Right.
And so you could be practicing those MBE questions, collecting your thousands of MBE questions you need to do before the bar a little bit early, and getting a grasp on some of this material.
Yeah, it's not like a magic switch is going to flip on May 1st and suddenly it counts more.
No.
You could start doing it in March. It would be fine.
Exactly. So Alison, what about people who are worried about the writing portion, essays and performance tests? What do you think they can do early for that?
Well, I think the performance test particularly is a great option to start with because A, if you haven't seen it, then it's something that you probably want to take a look at. The performance test can be your favorite area of the test because it doesn't require you to memorize anything. But that being said, it is something that you need to understand and you need to kind of have a process for. So, if you haven't done a class in law school that introduces you to this, you can use something like our WOW program where we do walk through individual performance tests. If you did one of these a week, say on the weekend, you would be well on your way to being ready for that section of the exam. And then you wouldn't have to study as many performance tests when you're trying to memorize a bunch of law or learn a bunch of law in classes you never took.
Yeah. And I think the other way to think about the performance test is really how much time it takes to do that practice. Each one of these performance tests is 90 minutes.
Right.
So, you can use a program like ours or do them on your own. But the reality is we're talking about allocating a couple hours on the weekends. It's just not that much, but over, 6 weeks, a few hours on the weekend starts to really add up. I think
if you did 6 performance tests before you even started bar prep, you'd be pretty golden.
Yeah, you really would. That's a huge benefit to your study. And those are just such easy points. They're such easy points. It just breaks my heart when somebody doesn't pass the performance test portion because they didn't have to know any law to pass it. And I'm just like, this is your moment.
Right. I think, two, sometimes people know that they have writing issues or they know that they have timing issues, for whatever reason. And I think this is a place that you can start to get help early too. So if your school has resources you can use before you graduate, or if you want to even start working with a tutor or something, this is something you could do in your last semester and hopefully set yourself up to be pretty well prepared on that part of the test before you even start official bar prep.
Yeah.
And what a relief,
What a relief. It's an empowering way to go into that period.
I mean, if you're taking the UBE, that's half of one day.
Yeah, it's great. I know. All right. So I'm a big fan of studying early. I think it's totally worth it to just put in a little bit of time. I don't think you're really risking burnout by just doing a little bit of work. I think you're just going to lighten your load, which is great.
Right. And I think, we saw this when they ended up postponing the bar from July to October and people had all that extra time. The pass rates were much higher. And I think a large part of it was because people were not trying to cram in. I mean, there were lots of reasons for it probably, but I think one of them was people were not trying to cram all the stuff into 2 months. And particularly if you're somebody who struggled in law school or you have, you're a foreign attorney or something like that, like you're going to need more time, or you get accommodations and you need more time to study. There's no harm in taking more time if that's what you need to pass. And, usually your last semester is frankly not that intense anyway.
Yep, exactly. All right. Number 7 is always one of our favorites. Get your life in order.
Oh, totally. So many people we talk to are like, well, this happened and 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 this happened. It's like, okay, that doesn't sound like you really were setting yourself up for like a solid performance, does it?
No, and life is still going to continue to happen. We're going to talk a little bit more of that. But like today, it sounds like my washing machine broke, which is kind of a bummer. But, that's like an unexpected thing. I couldn't really have planned ahead about that, but taking the cat to the vet or getting my car smogged.
Having a wedding.
Having your own wedding. Moving. We have people who have been like, oh, I got married during bar prep. And you're like, what?
And I also moved across the country.
Right. I think you really want to, one, try and protect that time. But if there are life things that are going to come up, such as a family celebration or a family wedding or your best friend's getting married, you don't want to miss the wedding. Again, I don't think you have to miss the wedding, but you do need to then maybe move that time that you're not going to study to another place. So then you should go back to point number 6, which is study early, to release some of the pressure so you can do some of these things during bar prep. If you have to move during bar prep, then you better study early to give yourself the cushion for that. Yeah. You just got to be realistic, but it's, yes, one afternoon off isn't going to cause you to fail the bar, but a week off, well, that might be bad.
Right. Or if you're just being unrealistic about it. I mean, I had someone tell me recently that, oh, well, I'm going to go like travel in Europe for a few weeks, but I'll still be studying. It's like, really? Do you think that's actually going to happen?
No.
I don't know. I'm kind of guessing maybe you're not going to be at least at full capacity if you do anything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Got to be realistic. So do what you can to get your life in order.
Yeah, and I think anything like appointments, like eye doctor stuff, do all of that up front beforehand if you can. And, just try to avoid having things like that you have to deal with during these couple of months where you're going to be studying as much as possible.
Yep. All right. Number 8. If you are studying early, you do need to be cautious of burnout. So make sure you don't study too much so you lose focus and start to see your performance drop. So we talked about the benefits of studying early, but Alison, what is too much? Like, what is really too much studying?
Well, I mean, I think somebody who's trying to do a full study schedule of like a typical bar prep company on top of also going to school, like you don't need to do 12 hours a day if you're starting in March.
Right.
And you probably don't even need to do like, say, 3 hours a day every day. Just kind of drop it in and make sure that, you're spending some quality time, but you're not stressing yourself out too much, because I just don't think that's going to end up in a good place.
No. Now, this is different in advice than if you are like retaking the exam and you're working full time and studying. You do need to study early. You do need to follow a study schedule because you're not going to be able to study full time. But yeah, you can't study like 12 hours a day for 4 months straight. You'll lose it.
Yeah, and it's not generally necessary anyway.
No.
And, I think with working and studying, burnout is a real issue, and it's something people do need to be cognizant of. And something we talk to people a lot about. Well, are you getting time off from work? Like, what does that time off look like? Are you going to be able to protect that time?
Mm-hmm.
And are you saying you're going from 80 hours a week to 50 hours a week? Like, that's still kind of a lot.
Yeah, it's so true. You got to be really realistic about your other life commitments when you're trying to find that balance.
Yeah, and this is a place where I think the focus is so important. Like, I would much rather see someone do 3 hours a day, really focused studying, where they're doing active learning, and do that every other day for a couple of months versus like, I'm going to do that every day and I'm just going to get burned out, or I'm going to do 6 hours a day. Just do the time that you can realistically do and stay reasonably fresh, and make sure that you're making that time productive.
Yeah, I agree. All right. And number 9, keeping the pandemic in mind.
Do we have to?
I know. But you got to give yourself some cushion for your bar prep. So many studiers since the beginning of COVID have gotten COVID while studying for the bar exam, or have had other health emergencies or family emergencies that they need to step in. I mean, life is challenging right now. And so I really encourage people to assume that they're going to lose some of their study time for some reason. And so you want to give yourself a little wiggle room. So if you do get sick, you're not, trying to study while sick. It's just, again, like, just get better. That's the best thing to do is to focus on getting better. So if you are worried that life is complicated, or if you're worried about, COVID or other health things that could come up, again, just give yourself a little cushion, start a little bit earlier, bank some hours of work. So it's not going to feel like a tragedy if you have to take a few days off.
Yeah, I think this is so important too for parents, because that's also unpredictable at this point. Like, your kid's going to have to be at home, like all of these things. Yeah, and we're assuming the exam will be in person, but like there was like a brief moment like a few weeks ago where maybe February even was looking like it wasn't going to be. So you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yep.
And I completely agree. The more you can do earlier, just the more you have put into that tank, and then the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. All right. And number 10, try to keep perspective.
Good luck.
I know. It is wise to just keep the bar exam in perspective, that it is incredibly important, but it is just a test. And the worst thing that will happen is that you're just going to fail. And that's bad, but you can come back from it and have an amazing legal career. Plenty of people have. So like, you just have to write it down somewhere, or meditate on it, or put a sticky note on your mirror to remind yourself that this is, when it comes down to it, and a very important test, but it is still just a test.
Right. And I think thinking of it as a test is beneficial in another way as well, because it doesn't have anything to say about your ability to be a good lawyer.
True.
I mean, it doesn't. We know that. And I think that can be frustrating for people sometimes. Like, I know I'm like either so good at law school, or I did so well, or I think I'm going to be a great lawyer, even though I struggled in law school. Or we see this a lot with attorneys, like, I'm already an attorney, like I must know how to do the performance test. That doesn't really have any bearing on your ability to do the performance test. Like, the performance test, just like every other part of the exam, is an artificial exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And to pass the test, you just need to accumulate enough points from some piece of it. So, you don't have to be equally good on all of the parts of the test. If you're really strong in one area and not so great in the other, you can still pass. So I think people just have to think of it almost like a game, more strategically, of like, what do I need to do to get to the point where I can accumulate enough points to pass this test? And thinking about that, I think, can be helpful in kind of taking it out of this bigger thing of like, oh my gosh, this is everything. It's like, no, it's a test and you just need the points.
Yep. Yeah, I know. It feels so powerful, but it's just a test. Right. It's a point collection game.
Right. And the test can be like gamified basically in certain ways. If you're like doing poorly on a certain section of the MBE, that's a great opportunity, because that gives you the opportunity to make those points up quickly if you get better at it.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Well, we are about out of time. Any final thoughts for those studying for the July exam?
Well, I mean, I think I would just go back to number one and kind of the beginning of this, like get your ducks in a row, make sure that you're going to be able to sit for the exam with whatever accommodations you need, make sure you're going to be able to graduate. And then I really think studying early for a lot of people is a good idea. How about you?
Yeah, I was thinking about it when I was working on this podcast, and I remember when people I knew took the February exam when I was a 3L, and then there was this moment where I realized like we were next. It's like you're like your ticket's up next.
You're in the firing squad.
Yeah, and I was like, I remember it being like somewhat chilling. And so if you're having that moment where you realize that this is the next hurdle and that your group of friends is kind of up next, this planning and early work just is going to lighten the load and make it not feel such treacherous waters. You definitely can do this, but a little planning is going to make it a lot better.
Yeah, I definitely felt like we did not get a lot of information about what we needed to do to plan for any of this at the school I attended. And I think they just kind of assumed like you'll figure it out. But it would have been useful if I kind of thought ahead of this to like, what do I want to do? Like, where am I going to take the exam? I was still debating when to take the exam, like pretty far into the process.
Yeah. Yep. So make your decisions, pick your path, and then, execute it pretty much. Well, with that, we are out of time. I want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or Alison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.